Okay, today's topic is the AFR Emergency Action Plan. Now, if you're not used to hearing somebody say poop, guess what? Today is your day to get used to it because we're going to talk poop. The following recommendations are specific to our facility, but they're also in compliance with the requirements and standards. In fact, they're above compliance set by the California Department of Health and the National Swim Association. Recreational waterborne illness, RWI. A majority of all recreational waterborne illnesses are related or can be traced back to fecal matter. So that's the bottom line of it. Obviously, you want to tell your students, you want to educate people that in a public pool, you want to avoid swallowing the water because that's how you get recreational waterborne illness. You want to keep people out of your pool who've been sick, especially people who've had the flu. And they're supposed to, according to California law, stay away from your pool for 2 weeks after they've gotten over being sick. So that's those are things to remember about preventative measures. With our program, we offer makeups for people that are sick, and the makeups don't expire. So basically, that's the way we encourage people to stay home when they're sick. We don't want people to come into the pool sick, so that we can continue to keep the best chance of having the highest quality of water. We also have other guidelines that help prevent us from getting contaminated water, such as requiring to shower off the students before class. Also, making sure to watch out for kids that say they're not feeling well and things of that sort. So, and paying attention when kids say they have to use the bathroom. Parents will tell them, "Oh, you just went." Well, sometimes they just went pee, and now they got to go poop. So, get them out of the pool if they say they need to use the bathroom. And let the parents take them to the bathroom 5-10 times a class if that's what the child says they need to do. But if they go in frequently, you may want to ask, are they okay? Because if they're really having an issue, maybe they shouldn't be in the pool. But that's aside from the main topic today, which is how to deal with an AFR. AFR stands for Accidental Fecal Release. Okay, so how to deal with something, how to deal with what happens when somebody poops in the pool. Okay, and there are two different courses of action. We're going to start out with identifying, discovery, all of that stuff, and then we're going to split courses into what do you do for one kind of poop and what do you do for another kind of poop. Okay, so number one is you want to identify as soon as you are suspicious of any accidental fecal release in the pool. In other words, you want to be sure that there's no amount of time you're swimming in the pool where there might be poop in the pool. So if you see something suspicious where you think, that's a strange looking little piece of brown floaty stuff in the pool, don't just say, I'll check that out later when it won't be obvious that I'm looking at it. How long do you want to swim in a pool that has poop in it? Okay, so the bottom line of that is check it out right away. So you're going to temporarily suspend activity because you don't want to be looking around and then, it's poop. And then everybody who was in the pool and all the parents who had kids in the pool noticing you're looking around, they're going to be wondering why you didn't get people out when you thought there might have been poop in the pool rather than waiting until you were sure there's poop in the pool. So the first thing you do when you discover any suspicious debris in the pool, before you even retrieve it and look at it, you're going to get everybody out of the pool. Because there shouldn't be anybody swimming in the pool during a time where you think there might be poop in the pool. So you get everybody out and you check it out. So here's how you check it out. You be safe and you ask another coach to watch all the students on the deck so no one accidentally gets in the pool while you're taking a look at it. And then you retrieve the suspicious debris by using one of those like skimmer nets, okay? Some pools might have a designated skimmer net or something like that. You never try to use your hands or anything like that. You never try to identify debris by, smushing it or things like that, okay? So, because it can fool you. A leaf that's been floating around in the pool or from outside that's already slightly decomposed, and if you kind of step on it and it smushes, you don't really know what it was. It was could have been an old leaf, could have been poop, but then you're stuck with, now I don't know what it was, but it was brown and it smeared, and so now what do I do, okay? And we'll talk about that going forward. But anyway, what you want to use is this pool skimmer, because then you can get the debris out without having to touch it, without breaking it into smaller pieces, hopefully, right? So you visually identify the debris, okay? I know it seems like it should go without saying, but you don't sniff or touch the debris to identify it, okay? Even if you have a glove on, that's probably not the best idea. You're going to visually identify it. So here's the thing, you're going to try and look at it and decide what it is, okay? If you look at it and it looks like a piece of bark, okay, you have decorative bark around your building, or it looks like a rock or a little clump of dirt that came off of somebody's shoe, or just some pool sediment. Sometimes during busier times of the year, you might have skipped brushing the pool in the morning, and it's just some of the sediment from the pool. Is it a clump of hair? Is it a piece of food like a raisin, or somebody was eating candy or chocolate? Is it a bug? Okay, that gets swollen and odd looking. Is it a booger? Sometimes little scabby looking boogers can look like a little piece of poop while they're floating around there, but you get it out and ugh, gross, it's a booger. Okay, but a booger isn't a health hazard when it's floating around in your pool. You just get it out because it looks gross and it shouldn't be in your pool, but it's not something you have to suspend activity. You don't have to get people out and add extra chemicals, okay? Is it a scab? Because that also can be those things. So look at it and try to figure out, is it something that I can identify that is not poop, okay? If it's not something you can identify that is not poop, in other words, if you're not sure and it still kind of looks like poop, or you're not sure it's poop, then guess what? You just decide that it's poop right there, okay? And then you continue the course of action as if it's poop. Because when you don't know, then you can't for sure say it's not, and then it's your responsibility to offer the healthy water quality to your customers. If you're not sure whether or not there was poop in the pool, then you're not certain that you're being responsible for the quality of your water. So you need to make sure that if you cannot tell that it's not fecal matter, then you have to assume that it is. But you should be making a careful observation, okay? And that's why you also don't want to destroy the suspicious debris before you get a chance to look at it, okay? Some of the weird instances of this, one day I saw kind of a green gelatinous blob in the pool, and I got it out and I looked at it, and it was like a weird looking, sort of semi-solid, but like gelatinous almost, and I thought, well, that's weird. It almost looks like kelp, right? And I asked around for the class because I was like, anybody was snacking on kelp on the way here by any chance? And everybody kind of looked at me like, kelp, and I was like, oh dang. So I was going to have to just, because if I couldn't identify the source, why would kelp be in our pool? We're not next to an ocean, right? It would maybe some dried kelp, right? So as I was about to say, well, since I can't really figure out what it could be other than kelp, and everybody said they don't have any kelp, one of my customers was like, oh wait, my child was eating kelp in the car yesterday, and probably it was in her car seat and stuck on the back of her swimsuit because she rode here in her swimsuit. And and I said, look, that's good enough for me. And I made the announcement to the class, look, I'm pretty sure it's kelp from the car seat. We're going to continue class, but I want to be full disclosure for everybody who isn't comfortable swimming. Everybody's like, we're fine, then it's kelp, and kept swimming. So those are instances where you want to make sure you identify what it is, okay? If you can't really identify, just as I was in that instance, before that person spoke up about the kelp, even though I was accurate in what I identified it as, I didn't have any reason to believe that kelp could just jump in our pool. So the other assumption is that kelp got there from the back end of a person. So that's why I was about to make the decision to close the pool, okay? But it fortunately came from the outside of somebody's swimsuit on their back end. So now that you've discovered that and confirmed, let's say you've discovered and confirmed it's not any of those other things, it's definitely poop. Now what do? Okay? So once you determine that it is poop, you need to make sure nobody goes back into the pool. You need to go ahead and have all the patrons, tell them, class is over because we can't continue class. There's a minimum amount of time you have to make sure to get the pool cleaned and disinfected before you can allow people back in the pool. Okay? Lots of customers, if you tell them you had a potty accident in the pool earlier and we cleaned it up, lots of them are going to wonder if you drain the whole pool and put new water in, just like flushing a toilet or something, right? That's not necessary, and one of the main reasons that's not necessary is because, number one, chlorine kills the bacteria that is the main concern of poop, which is E. coli. It kills that bacteria in less than 3 seconds if you have the minimum amount of chlorine required by law. And in fact, that's kind of an old statistic based on when the minimum was 1 part per million, and now in California, the minimum is 1.4 as the minimum level of chlorine in a pool. I think it may be even 1.5, but you can't measure 1.5 and 1. So our minimum is 1.6. But anyway, I'm pretty sure it's 1.4. But if you at that rate, it's less than 3 seconds that E. coli is killed in something like 30,000 coliforms per minute. Okay, it's a logarithmic scale. But anyway, those bacteria are killed at such a quick rate that the chlorine makes it not really a health hazard once you get the source of that E. coli out of the pool. Okay. That obviously won't help anybody if they're swimming next to actual poop in the pool, so that's why you have to get it out, right? But the other reason you don't have to dump all the water out is most pool filters, whether you have a paper filter or a multi-medium filter or a sand filter or diatomaceous earth, a DE filter. By the way, a DE filter filters down to like 5 microns, which is so tiny that it literally even filters bacteria. It may not filter viruses, but it does literally filter bacteria out of the water. So between the chlorine and the filter, the pool that you're swimming in is pretty darn pure, okay? As far as germ-free. It's sterile, I should say, not pure, but sterile, okay? And so that's the reason you don't have to drain the pool entirely, okay? But what you do instead is make sure to, number one, remove all the fecal matter, okay? So whether it's a non-solid, in other words, a liquid release AFR, or a solid AFR, you want to remove all the debris. That's number one, because you don't want it to really get into your filter and be in the filter while it's going through, because things like odors and stuff like that, those are smaller than 5 microns. Those molecules are tiny. So you need to get all that out, okay, and also remove, because you're also trying to remove the source of the E. coli. So you want to get all the fecal matter out. You don't use the pool vacuum. For our facility, we have a specially constructed AFR vacuum that we do use, and this AFR vacuum is a hybrid between a low pressure vacuum that's not hooked into the pool system, because you don't want to pull the water into the circulation system, contaminated water or debris. And it has a 7 micron net on this vacuum. So it vacuums at a low pressure, so it's not breaking up any material, and it catches it in a very, very fine filter net, which makes it specifically modified to work for AFR situations. So there's a particular kind of AFR vac, but in general the CDC says don't use a vacuum to remove fecal matter from a pool, and the reason is most vacuums are either too high powered, so they break up the debris and actually make it smaller, or they're hooked into your actual pool filter system, and both of those things are the reason that it's not recommended to use a vacuum. But our vacuum for our facility is specifically modified, so be sure you're using the AFR vacuum for that. The recommended manners, use a skimmer net for everything you can see. Okay, and for our facility, you're going to use the AFR vac anyway over the bottom of the pool for everything you can't see. And it's a surprising amount that comes up from what you originally couldn't see collects up in there. So I would recommend looking into that. Then you want to clean and disinfect all your materials. So what do you do with the debris you're scooping out of a pool? Okay, so if it's a solid debris, then you can dispose of it into a biohazard trash bag. So for our facility, we take the top lid off of one of our trash cans, we dump the debris directly into the trash can, and then at the very end we close that bag up and stick it into a biohazard bag that's available right next to the trash can there, and then that's tossed into the trash. Biohazards, depending on your municipal trash, ours can go straight into the dumpster and they pluck out the biohazard and incinerate it. So that's how ours is handled locally. You'll have to look into your own laws, how you handle biohazard, and follow your own facility recommendations when it comes to disposing of the debris that you're removing from the pool. Okay, stuff that is too small, like that we collect in the net, we rinse through the sewage system. So for our facility, the best is the inside of one of our showers. Okay, so we turn the net inside out, rinse it out inside out, and then we'll talk about disinfecting the shower using the bleach spray. But we'll get to that in a moment. After you remove all the fecal matter, and you then want to leave like the skimmer net that you used in the pool, the AFR vac you actually remove from the pool because it shouldn't sit in there very long. The water can get into the battery compartment of the vacuum itself. So we're just going to put the net from the AFR vac back into the pool to disinfect, but make sure that the net is thoroughly cleaned out before you do that, because we don't want to reintroduce any contaminants back into the pool. And that's for the disinfection time. They're not left in there obviously indefinitely, but for the disinfection period. And we'll talk about how long that is depending on the type of infection. Type of contamination. So when you're disposing of the debris, anything that's too small is rinsed in that shower. Everything larger is dumped in the trash. Then you just leave your tools that you use for scooping the debris out in the pool during the disinfection period. Okay, depending on the debris or the type of contamination in the pool and how you've removed it, you may need to use a little more pressure when rinsing out the nets. For the AFR vac or for your skimmer net, and so you can use the hose that for us we use for washing the deck, unwind it and bring it over into the shower area. The reason that we use the shower is because the debris has to go down the sewer. You can't rinse it outside or whatever, because that's considered gray water or even unsanitary sewage, right? And you can't rinse that out into like your grass or the parking lot, because then you're contaminating those areas. So it has to go down to a sewer, and that's what the shower is attached to. Okay, once you do all that and you have your tools soaking in the pool, there's a person who's going to do a pH and a chemical check in the pool. So they're going to test the free chlorine level and the pH level of the pool. The person in the the other person can go and notify the office of the type of AFR you had. The reason that it's important to remove the debris first. So if you have two people, okay, one person can start removing debris, the other can go notify the office that we're closing closing the pool for a period of time. If you have 3 people, 2 people should be cleaning the pool and the other go notify the office. If you have 4 people, 3 people should be cleaning the pool and the other go notify the office. So in case you haven't picked up on it, getting the debris out of the pool is the most important first step. Okay? So that's what you're going to prioritize manpower on. There shouldn't be anybody who's just standing around. Okay? As long as there's debris to be removed from the pool, all hands on deck, removing debris from the pool, except for the one person you might be able to spare to go notify the office. If you're alone, remove the debris from the pool first, then go notify the office if they haven't come to talk to you about it, okay? Usually in that case, the office is probably going to get a chance to come talk to you before you go talk to them. Remove the debris is the important first step. Okay, I know I'm repeating this a lot, but that's because it's important. Now, we're going to get to what to do in one circumstance or another. Okay, if the debris is what you call a formed stool, in other words, you can tell it's poop because it's in a solid shape of a poop, then you know you have a formed stool. Then you're going to take the following course of action. Now, how do you decide, is this a formed stool or a diarrhea? How do you decide that? Like, have you never, like, this is a great philosophical question of the ages. The bottom line is this, okay? Lots of people, you know, nowadays especially, are eating more healthy. They got more fiber in their diets. Just because of a fecal accident might break into smaller pieces does not mean it's an unformed stool. Okay, diarrhea is sort of a classic thing that comes out in a liquid brown cloud with, you know, some debris floating in it, right? But it generally doesn't look like pieces of poop. It looks like pieces of food in brown mess. Okay, and I know it's disgusting and it's not a topic people like to talk about. But when it comes to closing the pool, you really want to make the right choice, okay? Because number one, if you make the wrong choice, people are going to get sick, okay? And number two, if you make the wrong choice, it could cost your facility a lot of money that isn't necessary if you close the pool for a longer time than needed, okay? But you want to close the pool for the necessary amount of time. So you have to make up your mind, is this a formed stool or a liquid stool, okay? Formed stool. You're going to go through these different processes after you've removed the poop from the pool, okay? So the number one thing that you want to do is make sure that you've notified the director, okay? The sooner that I know, the sooner that any questions that come up can be answered. You want to notify the manager, director, whoever's in charge of the pool, okay? In this case, it's going to be notifying me directly, the swim director. You're going to notify the front office that the pool is going to be closed for at least 1 hour, okay? So that's not because the pool has to be closed for an hour to decontaminate. That's a much shorter amount of time. But it's the amount of time that gives you the chance to make sure that you've removed all debris from the pool, that the pool is completely disinfected, and that any other necessary steps like putting stuff away and preparing for your next swim activity are all set up again. Okay, that's so that you're not going to have people come in for the next lesson and be inconvenienced by having to be turned away because you're not ready for them. So for a solid or formed stool, you're going to close the pool at least 1 hour from the point of which, usually from the point of discovery. Okay, so if you're discovering that an AFR at the end of a class, you're going to cancel the whole next class. Okay, if you're discovering the debris at the beginning of a class, you're going to cancel that class and the whole next class. So it's going to be more like an hour and a half, right? The minimum amount of time is an hour, so at least 1 hour. If you have to, if that hour puts you significantly into the next lesson, then you're going to need to close for, you know, longer than an hour, obviously, because you don't want to host a class 30 minutes into a class and say, oh, it's just because we just had poop in the pool, so you just have to wait a little bit longer. That's probably going to lose you more customers than it'll keep if you just cancel the one class, okay? So, or class hour. Because for us it happens to be up to 4 classes. That's why I said it's very important to decide what level, because there could be up to 4 classes per hour, okay? You're going to raise the free available chlorine concentration to 3 parts per million. Now that's the target. So if your chlorine already is at the required level, which would be at least 1.4, you're going to raise it then by a little more than 1.5 parts per million, so that your measured level is at 3 parts per million. That does not mean that you're going to put 3 parts per million into the pool every time. Okay. Frequently, if your pool is well maintained and you have a good chlorinator, you're going to be pretty close to that target anyway for a public pool, just because those are more like the recommended levels for a high volume pool to control chloramines and other bather load, etc. You're going to be pretty close to that already. So anyway, you want your free chlorine to measure 3 parts per million. Okay, you want to add whatever amounts of chlorine. For us, it's going to be the liquid sodium hypochlorite recommended by our adjustment chart, and we have those in the log of operations. You're going to take a test, decide what the free chlorine level is in the pool, and you're going to then add the difference you need to make sure that it gets to 3 parts per million. For our facility, how you add chemicals depends on the amount you need to add. But in this instance, you'll most likely use the manual dial, and the chlorine will be added by turning our liquid chlorine pump on for a specific amount of minutes. So you're going to refer to the log of operations and the minutes guide and decide how many minutes you add to raise that free chlorine level to 3 parts per million. We want that 3 parts per million to be maintained for at least 19 minutes. For our pool, with nobody in the pool, adding the amount to bring it to 3 parts per million as the target, 19 minutes later, it's going to be at 3 parts per million. So there's no need to add more in between during that time. However, after you've added the amount, you need to do the test to be sure that what you're getting is 3 parts per million. You also want to measure the pH, okay, because it should be around 7.2 to 7.5. During that disinfection period. So more than likely adding a large amount of chlorine is going to make your pH look really high. You may need to add some acid to that, but before you do an acid demand test, because sometimes the chlorine level can look really high, but you do an acid demand test and it says if you add acid you're going to shoot way below the target. So it may not even be necessary to add acid, even though your pH test might show that your pH is higher than you need. The pool's not going to require acid because adjusting it will put you below that. And once that chlorine burns off, your pool then will be way too low pH in order for you to even operate. So be cautious about adjusting the pH if you've added a large amount of chlorine to the pool. But you're likely not going to have to add much chlorine or adjust the pH for a form stool, because you're pretty near those chemical guidelines already. Okay, but you want to follow those guidelines exactly. So it says maintain the pH and that chlorine level for at least 19 minutes. Now, if you did all the cleanup and you got all the people out and you added the chlorine, if they're from the time that you take the test to confirm that there's 3 parts per million of chlorine in the pool, if you don't have at least 19 minutes before you're supposed to then reopen, then you're going to have to tell the office to extend that closure time. It's highly unlikely for most regular form stool incidents that that's going to happen. The 1 hour is usually enough time to do all of that and have that additional 19 minutes still available, and it's usually time you have way more than even 19 minutes left. Usually, okay? But in instances that we'll discuss near the end, it may be necessary to close a little longer than 1 hour, even for what's considered a form stool AFR. Okay? Be sure that you're filling out an AFR incident form, a report form, an AFR report, and you turn it into the appropriate person, which in this instance is me. Turn in your AFR incident form. They're found in the log of operations book under reports, and you'll see one under AFR. You fill it out and make sure that it's complete. Fill out every box. It's a good idea to get that out from the start, because the AFR form walks you through the AFR steps. so that asks what time the debris was identified, asks what time you dismissed patrons from the pool, it asks where you did and how you did the initial chem check, it asks how you added chemicals, so it walks you through all the steps. So I recommend you get that AFR report out to guide you through the whole step to begin with. It will give you all the steps that are in this emergency action plan, but it gives it to you in a fill-out form. And then afterward, once everything's set, you're going to make note on when you allow people back into the pool and resume class after 1 hour. It's a good idea to stay in touch with your office. They've only gotten notice that you're closing for a specific amount of time. It's a good idea, once you know you're on track for that designated time, send someone up to inform the office that you're on track and you will be opening at the designated time. Okay, now the previous was about any incidents involving a form stool. We're going to talk about what if your AFR involves diarrhea, or what's called a loose stool. The steps at the beginning are similar, right? Remove the debris. That's primarily most important. Also, step number 2, notify the pool director, right? So, and notify the front office. What you're going to tell the front office is that the pool is going to be closed for the remainder of the day, okay? And that's because the contaminants involved in diarrhea are different type of hazards. They could be protozoa, which are real pernicious and very resistant to chlorine. And if a protozoa is what's causing the diarrhea for the person involved, then it needs to be subject to a large amount of chlorine for a large amount of time. And in that case, you won't be able to have people swimming in the pool during that time. It could also be viral, which some viruses are also very pernicious. And the main thing, though, is that it could be a type of bacteria called Sporidium. They're a different, more resilient type of bacteria like Cryptosporidium. Those are the kinds of bacteria that are harder to kill, and they cause diarrhea. They could be protozoa like Giardia. They could be amoebas. There's other kinds of reasons that people have diarrhea, and those kinds of reasons could be caused by those things that require a much higher amount of what's called chlorine contact time, concentration and contact time. So that's why you're going to close for the remainder of the day, because you're going to raise the free chlorine level to at least 18.2 parts per million. 18.2 parts per million is probably more than you use for breakpoint when you're doing your typical shock treatment. Well, it should be definitely more than that, because your chloramine levels aren't typically more than half when you break point. So 18.2 parts per million is a very high amount of chlorine. Test your pH level first. When you test it after you add the 18.2, you may need to readjust your pH level, and you may need to readjust the following day. Be careful about your pH, because once again, you want to do acid demand tests to be sure, but adding a very large amount of chlorine can trigger different results for your pH test. So be careful about adding that, and you're going to get your chlorine level. You're going to add sodium hypochlorite. Right now, our dial system would require you to add more than an hour of chlorine, sitting there babysitting our timer. Right now, as of this video, we don't have a timer that would add that amount of chlorine conveniently. So if it's available, in other words, if we have liquid chlorinator available, I would recommend using the liquid chlorinator and measure out the amount you need in ounces and add by hand when you're adding to bring it up to 18.2 parts per million. That's the level you want to bring it to. If you cannot add it by hand, then you're going to babysit the timer. The timer max is 15 minutes. You put on 15 minutes, and then you put on 15 more, and then you put on 15 more, and put on 15 more. Set a timer for yourself to go out and reset the timer. Unfortunately, that's what it comes down to, is one person has to stay and babysit the timer until we get the amount of chlorine level in there, if all of our liquid chlorine is in the storage tank. But if not, then do it by hand. Maintain your pH level and that free chlorine level. Your pH level is going to be maintained between 7.2 and 7.5 for at least 14 hours. So if you go to 18.2 parts per million, then you need to keep it there for 14 hours. Okay? You may find if you look up CDC recommendations, but wait, they say to raise it over 20 parts per million, and they keep it that way for 12 hours or 13 hours at X parts per million. The bottom line is that what it boils down to is contact time. That's parts per million times the amount of minutes that you leave it. Now that's only true to a certain point, okay? Because some protozoa, like Cryptosporidium, for instance, or some amoebas, I can't name a specific one, they can sit in a chlorine level that's at 1 part per million indefinitely. There's no amount of time they figured out that it's like a clean bath to them. It's just as good a water to them as it is if you sat in 1 part per million chlorine. It's basically sterilizing the water for that amoeba. So you have to hit that certain point, concentration, over a certain amount of time. The reason that CDC has changed it to a higher amount for a shorter amount of hours is partly because some swim facilities were complaining that they had to be closed for too long in order to do that. For my concern, I don't really want to have super high chlorine levels for super long times in our pool either, but beyond 12 hours, nobody's in the pool anyway, so we're closing for 14 because that's the amount of time we can close, and before we have to have other people in, gives us time to reopen and readjust our chlorine levels and everything at that point. So 18.2 parts per million for 14 hours. That's what we're going to do it for. Complete an AFR incident report in the log of operations book, and you close the pool for the remainder of the day, which means you do all the closing chores that are required to consider the pool closed. And that's what you want to do. Reaffirm with the office you're closing the remainder of the day. If at any point during an AFR, if there is a person available, in other words, if you got 4 people, the pool's cleaned out, and you're closing classes the remainder of the day, that's a large burden on the office to inform all of those customers. Send someone up who's comfortable on the phone, who can go and help the office make the remainder of the calls if they haven't done so, or at least offer help. Okay, because that's a good courteous way to work together. So once all the debris is out of the pool, you may be able to spare manpower to go help the office in notifying customers of the pool closure. You can do that in any instance where you have the debris removed from the pool and you got spare manpower. Okay? If the pool is contaminated with vomit, if somebody vomits, the disinfection recommendations is just like a form stool. So in other words, 3 parts per million for 19 minutes. How long you close really depends on how big the incident is, okay? If somebody's really vomiting, you may need more than the amount of time to clean it up. So you may need to close for 2 hours just to make sure to clean up. So the amount of closure time there depends on the amount of time you think you're going to need to remove debris from the pool. Because the disinfection time is only 19 minutes at 3 parts per million. So that's what you want to keep in mind for that, okay? In the event of contamination with urine, in other words, if a child's in the pool and they announce that they just peed in the pool, then you're going to follow the following recommendations. Or if a child's in the pool and they look like they really need to pee, they don't say anything, but then you see the pool turn yellow around them, then you can assume they peed in the pool, and you follow these recommendations. The CDC has no recommendations for urine in the pool. They're going to assume a certain amount of people pee in pools. Obviously, you don't want to encourage kids to do that. It messes with your chemistry. The smaller your pool is, the bigger the deal is. If somebody pees in the pool, it can really mess up the chemistry of your pool. So what you do if somebody pees in the pool is and it's like a noticeable event, is you get the students out and then you do a chem check to make sure that all the chemistry levels are appropriate, so that you're at the target chlorine level for our pool is 2.2 parts per million. So as long as you're at that target level or above, and not above 5, and your pH level, our target level is 7.4 pH. Now, if your chemistry is within the guidelines, then we can put people back in the pool. If it's not exactly on the target, refer to the target guidelines of whether or not you can allow people to swim. But you want it to be at 2.2 and at 7.4 pH. 2.2 free chlorine and 7.4 pH. Then you can just let people back in the pool and resume lessons. All right, so in summary, make sure you identify right away. Make sure you take corrective action, whether you can know whether it's a solid or a liquid stool. Solid stool is you're closing for 1 hour. Liquid stool, you're closing for the remainder of the day. Okay, and for vomit, it's like a solid stool, but may have additional cleanup time. And so make sure you're making those decisions appropriately. Refer any questions to your swim director, but take action on getting that pool cleaned up and getting people back in the pool at the appropriate time.